Hey friends, welcome back to another Field and Garden podcast. It is your friend in flowers and host, Lisa Mason Ziegler, and I'm super glad you're here. So, we're in fall and we're heading into winter, and there's just no better time to maybe review steps, revisit steps, introduce steps of growing amazing cut flowers. So today I thought I would start at the beginning, sharing the 3 steps to starting a great cut flower garden. But before we do that, if you're new here, I want to welcome you for joining me. And so this podcast is made possible by thegardenersworkshop.com. That is our platform where you will find all things cut flowers, from tools, seeds, supplies, my books, a full library of online courses, whether you're a home gardener or you're a budding flower farmer or a flower farmer looking to expand their horizons. Plus, we have a ton of free resources. Our blogs over there, we have a sister podcast, Seed Talk, and lots of videos and just lots of helpful information. So when the time arises and you need guidance or equipment or seeds, or just looking for a little interest for some of your time, head over to the Gardener's Workshop. And don't forget when you're there to sign up for our farm news, because that's what keeps you in the loop. And we share so much great content through our farm newsletter. So friends, let's jump in. So the 3 steps, I guess I should say 3 areas of starting a great cut flower. Now, my goal in just about everything that I do is to try to set myself up to succeed the first time, right? There's nothing just worse than doing a bunch of work and then failing. And it's not only annoying to me, but it wastes time and money. But what I have learned now from 25 years of really sharing what I do with other people and mentoring and teaching is that not everybody has the staying power that I seem to have, meaning to continually get back up, brush your knees off, and power on, right? So I have learned that setting yourself up to succeed pretty much the first time out of the gate really helps more people get to the finish line. Instead of trying it once, maybe trying it twice, but then just throwing in the towel and just moving on to something else, thinking they can't do it. So this podcast today is all about laying the overview groundwork for you to succeed out of the gate. And the first thing I want to share, that's actually not one of the steps, but as I was laying this podcast out, there's so much potential information and rabbit holes we could go down. So I'm really trying to keep this top level, which I find is the best way to be successful, right? Is to not get caught up and don't sink into the details. You just really don't need to do that, right? So one of the things that I talk about in my book, The Cut Flower Handbook, when I bolded it in my manuscript when I sent it to the publisher, but I wasn't sure they were going to keep it bolded, and they did. And it's because I feel like this one little piece of the pie dictates who's going to succeed and who is not going to succeed. And that is, friends, to start small. And the reason it's so easy for us to not to go beyond what we really need is until you've grown a cutting garden, you just don't understand how much a small cutting garden produces, because it's not like a landscape. When you treat this garden as a cutting garden, then you are going to produce so many more flowers than you ever imagined. And this still happens to me today. So go with the recommendations of when you get down to the details of picking the size of your garden from our resources or from another reliable source. So starting small is a big piece of the groundwork in your mindset for this, right? The other thing that I'll just touch on is to say to limit the different types of flowers you grow in your first cutting garden or gardens after you've done a couple, because again, it is just treating a cutting garden like a cutting garden will produce so many more flowers than you will ever imagine. So let's, kind of get on this about first, let's define what is a cutting garden, because not everybody understands. I know that I didn't. So the sole purpose of this little garden is to produce flowers that are going to be cut and taken indoors to be used in a vase, whether it's for your home or you're selling flowers or whatever you're doing. So everything we do for and with this garden is for that end result. Beautiful, long-lasting flowers, right? Keep that, put that on your mirror maybe, and that helps us to just keep us on track. And we grow annual plants in this designated cutting garden. That's another part of the key to success, which I'll touch on that a little bit later. So this little designated cutting garden is full of annual plants that are going to produce the most over the longest period of time. And so that's what we're focusing on. And another piece of this pie that, again, until you're doing this, you don't realize that the actual harvesting is the lifeline of this garden. Cutting twice a week, combined with planting 3 seasons of annuals, known as succession planting, which we'll touch on that in a moment, will go on to produce non-stop flowers. I think the harvesting thing is one that people are very afraid of, and I fall victim to this too. You're afraid to cut the flowers because you don't think they're going to grow back, and you don't realize until you just do the tough love, cut like is described in the resources, and you realize that that keeps your garden in a constant state of producing more flowers all the time. So literally, harvesting is the lifeline of a cutting garden. Another piece of this is staying in the lane of the cutting garden. It is so surprisingly rewarding when you do this. It is so much easier if you can just keep yourself focused on remembering the point of this garden is to produce cut flowers, right? So you're not picking up a pot of something at, you see, our grocery store has awesome container plants often sitting out front. If you happen to hit the day that they get delivered and bringing them home and planting them in a container or in your landscape, you are not doing that for your cutting garden. You will not find cutting garden variety plants, typically hardly ever, if ever, available somewhere to buy. You have to start from seed. That's key. So staying in the lane of this is a cutting garden. It is so easy to grow, y'all. I just can't even tell you. If I can do it, anybody can. I'm not a talented gardener. I was a novice gardener when I started this. I basically just followed the rules, followed what the resources that I followed told me to do. So a cutting garden is super easy, but be really aware of taking these detours. You can detour over in your landscape, but you're not going to detour in your designated cutting garden, whether that's a small home garden or a larger, starting flower farming garden, right? When you stay this designated journey, it has just led people to such amazing places. We have people that are growing cut flowers. They've had so much success in their little cutting garden. They now have a little gifting program where whether they're gifting hospice patients, nursing homes, hospitals. There's just no end to what can be done with that. And even building businesses growing and selling cut flowers. There are so many sweet and inspiring stories about how lives have been changed as a result of a cutting garden. And all of those start with sticking with the point. That's the quickest way to get there is what I'm saying. You can take the long winding road, but I will tell you that most people never arrive when we do that. So I want to mention one more thing before I hit these 3 steps, and that is some who are considering starting a flower farming business start with a season of what we call practicing, which may be some of those things I just mentioned, a gifting program. And I want to affirm you on that journey. And I understand that because starting a flower farming business is two huge bites. And that is, there's two parts in my mind of a flower farming business. There's the growing part, which is what 99% of people only consider and think about when they're starting, but that is less than 50% of what a successful flower farming business is. And then the other 50% is the business of the job. That is marketing and bookkeeping and getting all your P's in a row. And you don't have to have any experience on that either. There's resources for that. But, I understand that if you're a newbie on either side of that, either growing a production garden or business, you've never started or owned a business. I was so blessed that I worked at a very busy animal hospital for 15 or 16 years before I launched my flower farm. I was the office business manager. So it was like I was running the business, but I wasn't the one holding the bag. You know what I mean? It's like I still had a boss above me, the owner, Dr. H, that just the buck stopped with him, but I got to do and see and do everything as a business owner. If you don't have that gift, I understand why running a practice season as a production garden, and that's something that we could, go down a deep rabbit hole on, but it's having a small production working cutting garden that you commit personally to doing something with the flowers every week, whether it's gifting or whatever it is you're going to do, and sticking with it to kind of help you learn that there is a huge difference between gardening and farming and helping you digest that. So that practice season, I understand for growing, can be a great way to stick your toe kind of in the pool to see more what it's like and to get that clarity on the growing part, which can really reassure you, prepare you, maybe, not really, nothing can really prepare you for the whole show. It's like having a baby, right? People can tell you all day long how it's going to change your life, but until you do it, you just don't know, right? All right. So now let's take a look at these 3 steps, an overview for somebody that's never grown a cutting garden, or if you have grown a cutting garden and didn't have much success, to hit the actual reset button. So where it all begins for me is, where are you going to put this cutting garden? So I recommend, no matter how big or small your cutting garden is that it be a designated freestanding garden. This does a lot of things for you. This provides better light if it's not up against a building. And so a freestanding garden not only gives you the maximum sunlight, but also easier maintenance, meaning you can access it from all sides for cutting. That's another huge step. Once you prepare your garden, you don't ever want to put your foot on the bed and smash the soil of all the fluffiness you have created in there to make great drainage, right? And when you have a deep bed you're trying to reach into because it's up against a building, what's the first thing you do? You step on the bed so you can reach better to make the cut where it needs to be made. So a freestanding garden is the first part of my success. And then not putting that into your landscape. It's like, when I say a freestanding garden, I mean an island somewhere, which we're going to get to that. And this freestanding island is not going to be connected to your landscape. This is going to be, all of this helps you mentally, it helps you focus, and it just helps you for planning, right? And this surprises people, but I can tell you that this curtails one of the biggest problems people struggle with. Is I recommend that you place this designated freestanding garden island where you can't see it from inside your home or from sitting on your patio to enjoy it. And what's the point of that? It is because the number one struggle that I see people that haven't ever had a cutting garden and haven't experienced the positives of the cycle of a cutting garden is they're afraid to cut the flowers. And they're afraid to cut the flowers because they're too busy enjoying them from the kitchen sink or from sitting on the patio. If you can't see it, then you're going to be it will ease that pain of cutting those actual flowers. So my recommendation sometimes is the perfect place is exactly where you don't put your landscape because you can't see it. The side of the house, back that area behind your garage where you just never go. It's not that a cutting garden is unattractive. It's the fact that it spurs you to actually cut the flowers to bring them in so you can actually enjoy them. And perhaps the most important step is this garden to truly function as a cutting garden has to have at least 8 hours of sun. I've been known to say 6 hours, but I'm telling you, friends, if you want success, we are looking for full blasting sunlight, 8 hours or more. Not only does that grow the healthiest plants that we're talking about growing, but it makes them reproduce on the cycle that we need them to reproduce. Low light means less growth. So that's, really, really important. So full sun out of the gate, okay? So that's step one, piece one, is where you're going to put this garden, following a designated freestanding garden that is not in your landscape, that is in full sun and out of view from inside your home. So the second one is the soil. And friends, I want you to really think about this when I say this. The performance of your plants is a direct reflection of what their roots are sunk in. What is going on below ground is a direct reflection of what's happening above ground. That means if they're in crummy soil for whatever reason, poor drainage, not enough nutrition, whatever, that's puny plants. The number one, I can remember, Elliot Coleman, who was just such a great mentor, and I learned so much from his books. And he quoted, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, in the front of one of his books, a letter that Thomas Jefferson was writing to his daughter. She had written to her dad about her garden was struggling. And his reply to her was basically, the puny results of your garden is a result of your soil. And that summed it right up for me. That was in the, very beginning of one of his books. And it was like, what a light bulb moment. If you think that way, it'll change everything. Here on my flower farm, I am always, the first and foremost consideration is always the soil. Is it right? Is it ready? Is it too wet? Is it too dry? What do we need? Do we need more compost? Do I need more leaf mold? Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm not so focused on all the beautiful flowers I can grow. That's a result of my soil. So remember that and let it drive your garden. Poor soil conditions are not fixable with anything you can do above ground, meaning you can't build your garden and plant in it and your plants are struggling. There's no medicine for you to give your garden to fix that other than fixing the soil problem. But here's the good news. All soil problems can be fixed. And every time we replant, I call that flipping a garden, a bed, when you take one crop out and put the next planting in. Every time you do that, you have opportunity to add more. So this is a journey for the life of your garden. And that's why you don't have to just get so caught up in making it perfect the first time that you plant. You're going to do the best you can and you're going to plant. And then knowing that when that little garden is finished, that's why annuals are the secret to the cutting garden. When that crop is done its blooming cycle, and you take it out to put the next planting that you have ready and waiting, the key, the superpower to succession planting, you can add more stuff, compost, leaf mold, organic fertilizer, all of those things that you need for your particular situation. So with that all said, always recommend planting in raised beds. And raised beds look a lot of different ways. Most people, especially if you're new to gardening or haven't gone beyond a landscape, people immediately think of beds with a frame. A frame meaning whether that's wood or bricks or whatever. It's, like a frame, like a picture frame when you look down on it. There is more than that. There are what's called mounded raised beds. That's how our working cutting gardens are. Framed beds can be a benefit. I have both. It just depends on what your end result is. So I want to say that in my new book, Cut Flower Handbook, on page 38 and 39, there are great illustrations of preparing the soil, and it shows images. Actually, 37 shows My big working garden mounded beds, those are beds without a frame. You pile the dirt up and you don't have to have frames. And then it also shows some of my framed gardens, and it shows how to prepare soil. So a raised bed is great for a lot of different reasons. I mean, raised soil warms up faster. It naturally drains better. And if you have, like most of the people in the world do, have heavy, which is kind of a clay-based soil that just doesn't have excellent drainage, which is what we're aiming for, building up is a quick fix and also builds for the future of your garden. So raised bed, like my mounded beds are only like 4 inches tall, but you'd be amazed how much that 4 inches of lift does for my seedlings. Poor drainage is a common problem in gardens, but we don't recognize it and we blame that problem on other stuff. We just don't even realize it. This second step is the key to all great gardens. Low maintenance, thriving, healthy, carefree gardens all start with the soil, right? So poor drainage is really the problem, and well-drained soil is the key. And so having raised beds, even if you have excellent drainage, and I contend that people that think they might have excellent drainage don't always have it. You're right on the edge. You find out how excellent your drainage is when you start planting cool season hardy annuals, which we know is cool flowers that go through winter or through the whole winter. You soon learn just how excellent your drainage isn't, because soil doesn't naturally dry out in the winter. It has to drain. So everybody benefits from these steps is what I'm suggesting to you. So planning on raising the beds. There is a quick, down and dirty way in the book of building a quick, which I recommend to anybody, particularly if it's a home garden type bed, which, we recommend as 3x10 or 16, 3x16, is by poking holes in your soil where you're going to designate this bed with a garden fork, rocking and making cracks and holes in the earth, and then buying bales of potting soil and equal amounts of compost and mix them and build a raised bed out of excellent soil. And then you're going to build on that for the future, whether that's in a frame or not. That is a weed-free garden, first off, usually for a couple of years, depending on how well you take care of weeds and prevent them. But that is a down and dirty way, and there's the details of that in the book for those who would like to pursue that. Well-draining soil is key. Feeding the soil is for the life of your garden. And we do that by using finished/cooked. That means this is true for compost, for composted manure, composted mushroom compost, all of this stuff. The key is that it's gone completely through the process, and that's what I call finished. So that's when you're ready to add it to your soil. If you add unfinished products, leaves that aren't leaf molded, bark that hasn't broken down, compost that's got big chunks and is still cooking, when you add that to your soil, the soil kind of gets focused on finishing that process instead of taking care of your plants. So my practice is to only incorporate into my soil finished products. And that would be by way of compost, leaf mold, worm castings. We have to care for the microbes in the soil. And that is made up of all kinds of stuff, y'all. That is fungi and bacteria, all good stuff, good bugs. I mean, there are billions of little workers out there in the garden, and we have to feed them, and that's the kind of stuff that they eat. And every time you change out a crop, you have opportunity to increase adding that volume of product. So your soil, raised beds, add to your soil. We always add a balanced, dry, organic-based fertilizer according to their directions every time we plant. That feeds your soil to help it take care of your plants. So the third piece of this great little cutting garden is choosing the right plants to grow. Now, I've already touched on that this is an annual cutting garden. Annual plants when you cut them, if they're branching annual plants, continue. It's like that whole cut and come again concept. That's the whole point, right? So we're only putting in this garden annual plants because we're remembering the point, right? That this is a cutting garden. So we're only going to select cutting plant varieties to plant in this garden. And so what is that? So cutting varieties, let's just take the zinnia as a perfect example. There are so many different varieties of zinnias, but there are some that we grow Benary's Giants as our primary cash crop cutting gardens. And they're big, they're beautiful, and they have a lot of colors. Well, there are varieties of landscape zinnias that the blooms are just as big and beautiful as Benary's, but guess what? They only grow to be 8 to 20 inches tall. That is not a cutting garden variety, y'all. So that's why you have to step back and say, all right, I'm only going to plant cutting varieties. And when you're looking at seed catalogs, all the flowers on our website, thegardenersworkshop.com, all of our seeds, we primarily only sell cutting garden flower seeds, right? So they're all for cutting gardens. But when you're in a general population cutting gardening catalog or website, you're looking for those that might have the little scissor on it, or it may have a category that's cutting garden. Those are varieties that have proven to have a long vase life because they don't all, right? Perhaps that might mean that they're pollenless. Sunflowers are a great example of that. We grow pollenless sunflowers now. They still produce nectar for the bees and the pollinators, but they don't produce pollen. Why? Because you don't want a sunflower that typically would produce a lot of pollen dropping all over people's tabletops or yours. Because if you have allergies, it is really going to be a problem. Plus, when they produce pollen, that kills their vase life. They just don't last as long. Then there's things like abundant reproduction. That's another attribute for the branching ones. And they may have strong necks. And they produce tall stems. All of those things are what make specific flower varieties a cutting garden candidate. Okay, that's why we're looking to that. And then I'm just going to touch on this, but the Cut Flower Handbook really takes you by the hand and guides you on how to incorporate this. Succession planting, no matter how small or big your cutting garden is, from the home gardener to the flower farmer, the succession planting is the superpower to the key to having flowers from early spring right up until frost, no matter how small or large your cutting garden is. Y'all, that is the key. And that is once you, again, practice tough love and follow the recommendations. What that means is as soon as a plant starts not just producing good, tall stems, big flowers, it might get a disease or all of a sudden gets buggy. We quickly pull that plant out, that planting out, and we have another one ready to go right in. The point of this garden is to constantly reproduce. Now, this garden is also a great companion to your landscape. For instance, for us, I have a big peony patch and I have hydrangea groves. Both of those are not in my working cutting garden, but they certainly contribute. You could do that with your landscape, where you plant a hydrangea in your landscape knowing that you're going to scoot over there and grab some hydrangeas at the right time to add to your bouquets or for your production as a flower farmer. I just can't tell you how enjoyable this whole garden can be when you stay in the lane, stay focused. Isn't that with everything, right? I mean, just stay with the game plan. And that whole game plan is laid out in the Cut Flower Handbook. And if you're one of those folks that just does it and you fall absolutely in love, then friends, I'm here to tell you we have a big old pool of people for you to join. That almost every flower farmer, students, peers, every one of us has a story of how we didn't start this journey typically to become a flower farmer. We fell head over heels in love with growing flowers. And then we learned about cut flowers. Then we started growing a cut flower garden. And lo and behold, it became a huge source of accomplishment, success, and even for contributing to the income of our family. So friends, those are the 3 steps, the 3 areas, and that is where you locate it, what the plants are going to be growing in, and then growing the right plants. And there's a whole lot more of steps, but this is the 30,000 foot view of a cutting garden to get your brain thinking, tweaking, walking around your yard, wondering where are you going to plant your cutting garden. So friends, thanks for dropping into the Field and Garden podcast. As always, it is my pleasure to share this with you. And remember to head over to thegardenersworkshop.com where we have everything you need to grow an amazing, easy, abundant cutting garden. Till we meet again, friends. Ciao.